Welcome. Today I'd like to show you a few neat tricks that you can use in Google Spreadsheets with your data tables and your linear graphs. So I've created a spreadsheet file, and in it I've placed most of my data. And this was data collected during a temperature during change of state lab. And you'll see that my X data is time in seconds, and my Y data is temperature in degrees Celsius. I haven't quite finished all the data I need to input, so I'd just like to show you that I stopped here, but I have 11 more data points, and it turns out they are all 101 degrees Celsius. So rather than type that in 11 more times, I'm going to copy that data by selecting this box and then dragging the bottom right corner. Now I also need the time data. If we take a closer look at the time data, you'll notice that we've measured these temperatures every 30 seconds. So we start 0, 30, 60, 90, and so on. Now, if I tell the computer, hey, there's a pattern to this data, and I do that by selecting 3 boxes here, it will copy that data and continue the pattern on. So again, I've selected 3 boxes. I'm going to drag from the bottom right corner, and there you have it. So my data is now complete. My data table is good to go, and I am going to make a linear graph with this. So let's select the data. Now I've selected all of the numerical data, plus I've included the labels for the X and the Y data. So I've included time in seconds, temperature in Celsius, but I have not included the title of the data table. All right, I'm going to insert a chart. Now, when you are doing a linear graph, this is the most important step. When you are on this first screen, here we are, Start tab, you want to select this third box. And it says Use column A as labels. We must select that. All right, so here we have this selected. Now let's move to Charts. And here we're going to select Line and the very first type of line chart. Okay, now we need to customize this. First things first, I need a title, and this is temperature during change of state. I'm going to remove the legend, and now I'm going to label my axes. So here is my x-axis. It's on the horizontal axis. So I am going to label that as time. And include the units. Now, one of the requirements for the lab, it says it wants us to identify or show every 30-second interval. Well, I actually have 28 data points. So that means that instead of having just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 labels, I need 28 labels. So if I scroll down under axis, here's the grid lines, and I can change this number of major grid lines to 28. Now, if you'll notice, that means every one of my data points, every one of my time intervals is now labeled with a grid. Numerically, we just have every third label, and that's fine. This is easy enough to read. Here we are at 0, 30, 60, 90 with a label, 120, 150, and 180 with a label, and so on. All right, let's include a label for our vertical axis, and this is our y-axis data. I go back to axes, and I change this to left vertical, and the title for this is temperature degrees Celsius. Now, In the lab, we ask you to show the intervals of 10 degrees. So right now I have 1, 2, 3, 4 labels, actually 5 if I include 0, and I want to have 12 labels. Well, let's go down to the grid line, and if I type in 12 here for the major, there you have it. Now my temperature axis is labeled every 10 degrees Celsius. The last thing I want to do is add in data points. I scroll down here, series and temperature. I want to go to point size. I can type in 4, and that shows all of my data points. Now note, I will have to hand draw in an arrow that points to the very first temperature where the water was steadily boiling. But otherwise, this graph is ready to go. So let's insert it. Okay, so what I want to do now is take this chart, graph, and put it into my Google Doc. So let's take a look at the file I have so far. The only thing I've put in this is my data. So here I have data, it's underlined, it's in bold, I have a colon. So I've got my heading information correct. My data table still needs a title, but here is all my data that I just graphed. Here's time and temperature and all of my data points, all 28 of them. Now this is one way to make sure that you have your data table on just one page. The problem with having data tables that are on more than one page is that they are then missing this heading information of time and temperature, or they're missing the title. And if you're missing this information, then your data table isn't complete. If you can't get your data table onto one page, then you're going to have to make separate data tables so that each data table on each page has a title and it has the heading information like this data table has. All right, let's take a little bit more of a look at the data table. You'll notice here that I have identified at what temperature I had steadily boiling water, and it is commented on here below. Now what I'd like to do is add in my chart, my line graph, right after the data table. So let's go back to my spreadsheet, and from the drop-down menu here, I'm going to select Save Image. When I save the image, it is going to download a file, and that is the file that I want to then put into my Google Doc. So let's switch back. Here I am in my Google Doc. I open the Downloads file, and I drag my graph in. And it takes a moment, but you see, here is my data section, my data table, and it is followed by my graph. The graph that we just completed in Google Spreadsheets. And that is how you do some neat tricks in Google Spreadsheets with your data tables, with your linear graphs, and then take that information and put your final graph into your Google Doc.